Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that Canada is running the most expensive training program in history, except we're not keeping the graduates? What if the invisible force that was supposed to build our innovation economy has quietly packed its bags and crossed the border? While politicians celebrate record immigration numbers, something far more dangerous is happening in the shadows. The people who actually build economies, the engineers, the doctors, the founders, are vanishing in real time. Let me give you a number that should stop you cold. 820,000 Canadians. That's how many of our citizens are now living in the United States as of 2022. But here's what makes this number truly staggering. It surged by 50% in just 1 year after COVID. This isn't a gradual drift. This is a damn failure. And here's the part that should concern every single person watching. Among software engineering graduates from Canada's top universities, 66% leave for the United States immediately after graduation. Not eventually, not after building a career here, immediately. We are facing a structural fault line that no amount of government spending can paper over. This is the hollowing out of Canada's intellectual capital, and it represents a mathematical reality that politicians refuse to acknowledge. While we import millions of people to grow the economy, the only people capable of building that economy are making a different calculation entirely. They're voting with their feet, and the exodus has already begun. Now, why go through this elaborate charade of celebrating immigration numbers while losing our best minds? The answer reveals the big secret of the entire system. Governments measure inputs, not outputs. They count bodies crossing the border, not productive capacity. They celebrate population growth while ignoring the composition of that growth. Canada has become a training camp for the American economy. We subsidize their education through our public universities, and the United States reaps the dividends. This is not a conspiracy. It is a stated economic reality that anyone examining the data can see. Let me show you the architecture of this collapse, because understanding where this system came from is essential to grasping why it's crumbling now. We need to go back to the 1990s to understand the genesis myth of Canada's brain drain. During that decade, the Canadian dollar was weak, trading around 65 cents to the US dollar. Young professionals, particularly in tech and medicine, began moving south for better opportunities. The government dismissed it as temporary, a currency issue that would resolve itself. They were catastrophically wrong about the nature of the problem. Here's what they missed. In the 90s, it was primarily about money. The exchange rate made American salaries look dramatically better. But today, we're dealing with something far more fundamental. Today, it's about survival. A young doctor or engineer in Toronto earning $150,000 cannot afford to buy a home. That same professional in Texas earning $400,000 can buy a mansion. The American dream didn't die. It just moved to America. The scaffolding of middle-class aspiration that once existed in Canada has crumbled, and what replaced it is a rental economy where professionals are permanently locked out of ownership. But the real mechanism driving this exodus is something most Canadians don't understand, and the government certainly doesn't want to discuss. It's called the TN visa, and it functions as a frictionless exit valve for Canada's elite. Let me simplify this black box for you, because the complexity is often used to hide the truth. Most people think moving to the United States for work is incredibly difficult. They've heard about the H-1B visa lottery, where hundreds of thousands of applicants compete for 85,000 spots. They imagine years of waiting, lawyers, uncertainty, and for most of the world, that's exactly right. But for Canadians, there's a completely different system operating in parallel, a golden key that unlocks the door without any of that friction. The TN visa works like this. You get a job offer from an American employer. You show your degree at the border. You're in. No lottery, no waiting period, no cap on renewals. Think of it like a mortgage at 0% interest while everyone else pays 6%. It's the same destination, but Canadians have a structural advantage that makes the journey effortless. In 2024 alone, the United States admitted 150,000 Canadians under this status. The door isn't just open, it's being held wide. Now, here's the twist that makes this situation truly explosive. The Canadian government knows this is fatal to the country's long-term prospects. That's why they've begun implementing what I call the financial Berlin Wall. They're not building it to keep foreigners out. They're building it to keep Canadians in. This leads us to the system's most crucial secret, which we will explore shortly. But first, you need to understand what triggered the acceleration of this exodus from a steady leak into a flood. April 2024. The federal budget is released, and buried in the details is a policy change that detonates like a bomb in the entrepreneurial community. The capital gains inclusion rate increases from 50% to 67%. To translate that for anyone not fluent in tax code, if you build a successful company in Canada and sell it, the government will now take a significantly larger share of your life's work. The message this sent was unmistakable. If you succeed here, we will take more. If you fail, you lose everything. The response was immediate. Venture capital funding in Canada froze. Tech founders began moving their headquarters to Delaware. The brain drain, which had been a chronic condition, became an acute crisis. This was the trigger event, but it revealed fault lines that had been forming for years. Let me show you the canaries in the coal mine, the specific, tangible evidence that this rot is not theoretical but real and accelerating. Canary number one, the doctor shortage. Canada currently has 6.5 million citizens without a family doctor. 6.5 million people who cannot access basic primary care in what is supposedly a world-class healthcare system. Meanwhile, we are losing physicians to the United States, where they earn twice as much and don't have to navigate a collapsing public system, drowning in bureaucracy and wait times. These aren't marginal differences. A family physician in Canada might earn $180,000, while their counterpart in the United States earns $350,000. For specialists, the gap is even more dramatic. We're watching our healthcare system implode while the people who could save it are economically incentivized to leave. Canary number two, the Ghost Valley. Drive through Kitchener-Waterloo, the region politicians love to call Canada's Silicon Valley. Look at the office buildings. You'll see the logos: Google, Microsoft, Amazon. But here's what those offices really represent. They're satellite branches, outposts. The intellectual property created there flows south across the border within microseconds. The patents are filed in California. The strategic decisions are made in Seattle. The wealth compounds in American cities. Meanwhile, the wages paid in Waterloo are calibrated to Canadian levels, which means the talent is underpaid relative to the value they create. We have become a digital colony, supplying labor but owning nothing. The edifice of our innovation economy is a facade with no foundation. Canary number three, the senior exodus. And this is perhaps the most revealing indicator of all, because it demonstrates this isn't just about ambitious 25-year-olds seeking adventure. Experienced professionals in their 40s and 50s, people who've built careers, raised families, established roots, are now leaving for executive roles in Dubai, Singapore, and American cities. Why? Because the glass ceiling in Canada is structurally lower than in competing economies. The compensation packages at the executive level, Once you account for taxation and purchasing power, make staying in Canada an active financial sacrifice. These are people who wanted to stay, who tried to make it work, but the mathematics of the situation became undeniable. Now, let me show you the encirclement, the systematic dismantling of every escape route, every traditional form of safety that Canadians once relied upon. You stay in Canada, you face a 53% marginal tax rate in provinces like Ontario and Quebec. That's not a political talking point. That's the mathematical reality for professionals earning over $200,000. You take home less than half of every dollar you earn above that threshold. But here's the part that makes this truly suffocating. That same professional can't afford to buy a house in Toronto or Vancouver. The average detached home in Toronto now costs $1.6 million. To qualify for a mortgage on that property with 20% down, you need a household income exceeding $300,000. Yet the median family income in Toronto is barely $100,000. The system has created a cage where even high earners are locked into permanent renting. You try to build wealth through a business? The April 2024 budget made that calculation worse. Build something valuable, and when you sell, 67% of your capital gains above $250,000 will be included in your taxable income. That's not a tax rate, that's the inclusion rate, but the effect is the same. You keep significantly less. And remember, you built that business despite the high taxes, despite the regulatory burden, despite the lack of venture capital compared to the United States. You did everything right, and the reward is a larger government claim on your success. You decide to leave? Here's where the trap truly reveals itself: the exit tax. When you cease to be a Canadian tax resident, the government treats it as if you sold all your assets on your departure date. Even though you haven't sold anything, you have to pay tax on unrealized capital gains. It's a departure penalty, a financial barrier erected specifically to make leaving expensive and complicated. They're building a Berlin Wall made of tax policy, and the message is clear. You have to leave before you become successful, or you'll be trapped by your own achievements. The liquidity tide is going out, and we're about to find out who has been swimming naked, because here's what this convergence means in practical terms. The window to leave cleanly is closing. Every year, the tax policy gets more aggressive. Every year, the housing becomes more unaffordable. Every year, the wage gap between Canada and the United States grows wider. The people who understand this are already gone. The people who are beginning to understand it are preparing their exit. And the people who refuse to see it will be the ones left behind wondering what happened. Let me give you the forensic evidence that proves this isn't speculation. It's already happening at scale, and the data is irrefutable. A software engineer graduating from the University of Waterloo, one of Canada's premier engineering schools, earns approximately 121,000 Canadian dollars if they stay in Vancouver or Toronto. Convert that to US dollars, and you're looking at roughly 90,000 US dollars. Now compare that to their classmate who crosses the border, 222,000 US dollars, working for a tech company in Seattle or San Francisco. That's not a 20% difference or a 50% difference. When you account for currency conversion, tax rates, and cost of living, that's a 3 times multiplier in purchasing power. 3 times for doing the same job, with the same degree, from the same school. But it gets worse. That Canadian earning $121,000 in Vancouver cannot buy a 1-bedroom condo without stretching their finances to the breaking point. That American earning $222,000 in Austin or Raleigh can buy a 4-bedroom house with a yard. The divergence isn't just about money, it's about the ability to build a life, to start a family, to achieve the basic markers of adulthood that previous generations took for granted. And here's the part the government desperately doesn't want you to understand. This isn't a market failure. This is policy failure compounded over decades. The housing crisis wasn't created by immigration alone. It was created by refusing to build housing while simultaneously adding millions of people. The wage stagnation wasn't created by globalization alone. It was created by tax policy that punishes productive work while inflating asset prices. The brain drain isn't happening because young Canadians lack patriotism. It's happening because patriotism doesn't pay rent. Now, I need to talk to you about something that makes people deeply uncomfortable, but it's essential to understanding why this crisis is accelerating rather than stabilizing. Normalcy bias. Human beings are hardwired to believe that tomorrow will look like yesterday. It's a survival mechanism that worked well for thousands of years when change happens slowly. But in moments of structural collapse, normalcy bias becomes fatal. It's the reason people couldn't believe their home prices would fall in 2008 until they had already fallen. It's the reason people couldn't believe inflation would return until it was already eating their savings. And it's the reason most Canadians cannot believe that their country is losing its best and brightest at an accelerating rate, even as the evidence surrounds them. Let me tell you what normalcy bias looks like in this context. You assume that because Canada has always been prosperous, it always will be. You assume that because we have universal health care, we always will have it in functional form. You assume that because previous generations could afford homes, your generation will eventually be able to as well if you just work hard enough. These assumptions are crumbling in real time, but the psychological adjustment hasn't caught up to the economic reality. Here's another concept you need to understand: the money illusion. This is the phenomenon where you become a millionaire on paper, but poorer at the grocery store. Your house appreciates from $500,000 to $1.5 million, and you feel wealthy. But you still live in the same house. You still need to eat the same food, which now costs twice as much. Your property taxes tripled because they're based on assessed value. Your insurance doubled. And if you sold that house to realize your wealth, where would you move? Every other house appreciated by the same percentage. So you're just trading one expensive property for another. The wealth is an illusion. It's trapped equity that you can't access without leaving the market entirely or dramatically downsizing. Meanwhile, your salary stayed flat, your taxes went up, and your purchasing power evaporated. This is the psychological trap that keeps people immobile even as the foundation beneath them cracks. They look at their net worth on paper and think they're winning, while their actual living standards decline year after year. The younger generation, who don't own property yet, can see through this illusion immediately. That's why they're leaving. They understand that a system where nurses and teachers can't afford to live near their workplaces is not a system worth staying in. Now, let me show you the convergence, the three distinct forces that are hitting simultaneously, creating a crisis that is greater than the sum of its parts. Force number one, the wage gap. Canadian salaries have stagnated relative to American salaries for professionals in high-demand fields. A decade ago, the gap was perhaps 30 to 40%. Today, depending on the field, it's 2 to 3 times. This isn't about exchange rates fluctuating. The Canadian dollar has been relatively stable. This is about Canadian employers refusing or being unable to compete globally for talent, while American companies aggressively recruit across borders. The result is a structural arbitrage opportunity that every rational actor will eventually exploit. Force number two, the housing crisis. This is the linchpin, the thing that makes every other problem unsolvable. When a dual income professional household earning $200,000 cannot afford to buy a home in the city where they work, the system has broken. When teachers, nurses, and tradespeople are forced to commute 2 hours each way because they're priced out of the communities they serve, the system has broken. When young doctors finishing their residencies look at housing prices and realize they'll never own property unless they leave the country, the system has broken. Housing isn't just an economic issue, it's the foundation of social stability, family formation, and long-term planning. When that foundation crumbles, everything built on top of it becomes unstable. Force number 3, the tax wall. Canada has positioned itself as a high-tax jurisdiction that promises high-quality public services in return. But the services are visibly degrading while the taxes continue increasing. Healthcare wait times are among the worst in the developed world. Infrastructure is crumbling. The education system is overcrowded. Meanwhile, professionals look south and see lower taxes, higher salaries, and functional systems. The social contract has been broken, and people are responding by leaving. These three forces aren't independent variables. They compound each other. The housing crisis makes high taxes unbearable because you're paying Swedish tax rates to live in a rental apartment. The wage gap makes the housing crisis unfixable because even high earners can't save enough for down payments. And the tax wall ensures that even if you do manage to build wealth in Canada, a disproportionate share will be confiscated when you try to realize that wealth or pass it to the next generation. This is what I call the competence void, the space that's created when the people who can solve complex problems decide those problems aren't worth solving in Canada. When the software engineer who could build the next great Canadian tech company decides it's easier to join Google in California. When the doctor who could innovate in healthcare delivery decides the bureaucracy isn't worth fighting. When the entrepreneur who could create thousands of jobs decides that Delaware is a better jurisdiction than Ontario. The void doesn't appear all at once. It accumulates gradually, each departure seeming like an isolated incident, until one day you look around and realize that the people who could have built the future have built it somewhere else. Now I need to talk about something that will make some of you uncomfortable, but it's a conversation we must have: the loyalty tax. You've been told your entire life that staying in Canada is the patriotic choice, that leaving is somehow betraying your country, your community, the values you were raised with. This narrative is powerful because it's emotionally manipulative, and it's wielded most aggressively by the very people whose policies created the exodus in the first place. Let me be very clear about what the loyalty tax actually is. It's the financial donation you make to the Canadian government every single year by choosing to stay when you have better options elsewhere. It's the $200,000 in lost income over a decade. It's the $1 million home you'll never be able to afford. It's the capital gains tax you'll pay that your American counterpart won't. It's the opportunity cost of building a career in a market that systematically undervalues your contribution. And here's the critical part: this donation is not voluntary. It's extracted through a combination of policy failure and moral guilt. The government cannot force you to stay, not yet anyway. So instead, they try to make you feel guilty for leaving. They frame departure as selfishness, as abandonment, as a failure of character. But here's what they'll never tell you: the system doesn't value your loyalty. It consumes it. Every year you stay in a jurisdiction that taxes you at 53% while offering declining services is a year you've chosen loyalty over your own financial survival. And for what? So politicians can claim they're retaining talent while doing nothing to address the structural factors driving that talent away. Let me give you a framework for understanding what's really happening here, because the narrative you've been fed is designed to keep you confused and compliant. Canada is running what I call a catch and release program for human capital. We invest heavily in education. Our universities are world class, subsidized by taxpayers. A domestic student at the University of Toronto pays about $8,000 per year in tuition for an engineering degree. The actual cost of delivering that education is closer to $30,000 per year. The taxpayer covers the difference, an investment of roughly $88,000 over 4 years per student. Now watch what happens next. That student graduates, looks at the market, and realizes their degree is worth 3 times more in the United States than in Canada. They take the TN visa, cross the border, and begin paying taxes to the IRS instead of the CRA. The Canadian taxpayer invested $90,000 to train an engineer who will generate exactly zero return on that investment. Meanwhile, the American taxpayer invested nothing and captures the entire lifetime value of that professional's productivity. This isn't brain drain, it's intellectual arbitrage at a national scale, and Canada is on the losing side of the trade. But here's where it gets truly perverse. The government's response to this crisis isn't to fix the underlying problems, it's to build barriers to exit. The exit tax I mentioned earlier isn't designed to raise revenue, it's designed to trap capital. When you leave Canada, you're deemed to have disposed of all your assets at fair market value, even though you haven't sold anything. You owe tax on gains that exist only on paper. For someone with a successful business or significant investments, this can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax liability before you're allowed to leave cleanly. It's a ransom payment for your own freedom. Now, let me show you what this means in practice, because the abstraction hides the human cost. Picture a 42-year-old software architect in Toronto. She's been working for 15 years, climbed the ranks, now earns $200,000. On paper, this sounds successful, but here's her reality. After taxes, she takes home roughly $110,000. Her rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $3,000 per month. $36,000 per year. Daycare for 2 children is another $24,000 per year. She's left with $50,000 for everything else: food, transportation, saving for retirement, her children's education. She cannot save for a down payment on a house because housing prices are rising faster than she can accumulate savings. She's running on a treadmill that speeds up every year. Now picture her equivalent in Austin, Texas. Same role, same skills, same experience. Salary, $350,000 US. After taxes in Texas, which has no state income tax, she takes home roughly $260,000, mortgage on a 4-bedroom house, $36,000 per year, childcare, $18,000 per year. She's left with $200,000. In 5 years, she'll have the house paid off. Her children will attend well-funded public schools. She'll retire a multi-millionaire. The person in Toronto will retire still renting, still struggling, wondering where it all went wrong. This isn't a hypothetical. This is the calculation that tens of thousands of Canadian professionals are making right now. And the people who've already made it aren't coming back. Why would they? What could Canada possibly offer that would justify cutting their income by 60% and their quality of life by even more? Here's the binary choice facing every skilled Canadian professional today. And I want you to think about this carefully, because the window for making this choice is narrowing. Do you own assets, or do you own claims on assets? Let me explain what I mean by this, because it's the difference between surviving what's coming and being wiped out. Owning assets means you have things of tangible intrinsic value. A house you live in is an asset, not for investment purposes, but because it provides shelter that no one can take away if you own it outright. Skills that are globally portable are assets. A professional credential that's recognized internationally is an asset. Gold, silver, physical property in stable jurisdictions, these are assets. They exist independently of the Canadian economic system. Owning claims on assets means you have paper promises that depend on the system continuing to function as it currently does. Your RRSP is a claim. It's a promise that the government will honor the tax treatment they described when you contributed. Your pension is a claim. It's a promise that the fund will remain solvent and that inflation won't destroy the purchasing power. Your equity in a Canadian company is a claim. It's a bet that the business environment in Canada won't deteriorate further. Every one of these claims is denominated in Canadian dollars and subject to Canadian policy decisions. Now, I'm not telling you to abandon all claims. That's neither possible nor advisable for most people. But I am telling you to understand the nature of what you own. When I talk to young professionals who are deciding whether to stay in Canada or leave, I tell them this: your most valuable asset is your human capital, your skills, your energy, your productive years. That asset is portable. The question is whether you're going to deploy that asset in a jurisdiction that values it or one that extracts from it. If you're a software engineer, a doctor, a skilled tradesperson, a researcher, anyone with globally marketable skills, you need to get your TN visa paperwork ready now, not next year, not when things get worse, now, because here's what's coming. The exit tax will get more aggressive. The taxation of unrealized gains will expand. The barriers to leaving will multiply. Every year, the government becomes more desperate to retain the tax base, which means every year they'll make it harder to leave. The people who understand this are already gone. The people who are starting to understand it are planning their exit, and the people who refuse to see it will be trapped. Let me be very clear about something. I'm not advocating that everyone should leave Canada. For many people, those with deep family roots, those whose work is location specific, those who've already built wealth and can afford the loyalty tax, staying might be the right choice, but it needs to be a choice made with open eyes, understanding the full cost. What I'm arguing against is the lie that you should stay out of patriotism while your financial future is systematically destroyed. Patriotism that demands your impoverishment is not patriotism. It's exploitation wrapped in a flag. And here's the final thing I need you to understand: the piece that connects everything we've discussed. This crisis is not reversible through incremental policy changes. You cannot fix a wage gap by adjusting tax brackets. You cannot solve a housing crisis while adding 500,000 people per year without building corresponding housing. You cannot retain talent by making it harder to leave. You retain talent by making it attractive to stay. But every policy decision of the last decade has moved in the opposite direction. The government has chosen to prioritize immigration numbers over integration capacity. They've chosen to prioritize asset price inflation over affordability. They've chosen to prioritize revenue extraction over economic competitiveness. The result is a country that's losing the people who build economies while gaining people who need support. I want to be very careful here because this observation is purely economic, not cultural or moral. Every person has inherent worth regardless of their economic productivity. But countries as economic systems need a balance between producers and consumers of public services. Canada is importing millions of low-wage temporary workers while exporting doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs. From a purely mechanical standpoint, that ratio is unsustainable. You cannot run a first world economy with third world wages while maintaining first world tax rates and expecting first world professionals to stay. So here's where we are. 66% of software engineering graduates from our top universities leave immediately after graduation. 820,000 Canadians now live in the United States, a number that surged 50% in 1 year. The wage gap for professionals is 2 to 3 times when adjusted for purchasing power. Housing in major cities is unaffordable even for high income households. The government's response is to make leaving more expensive rather than making staying more attractive. This is the convergence, the simultaneous failure of wages, housing, and tax policy, creating a perfect storm that's driving away the exact people the country needs most. And time is not on your side. The longer you wait, the more expensive it becomes to leave. The longer you stay, the more the loyalty tax compounds. The longer you defer this decision, the fewer options you'll have. This is not a conspiracy. It is mathematical reality playing out in real time across hundreds of thousands of individual lives. History favors the prepared, and the window for preparation is closing. The people who could see this crisis coming left 5 years ago. The people who are seeing it now are packing their bags, and the people who refuse to see it will spend the next decade wondering why their children can't afford to live in the country they were born in, why their own retirement isn't enough to survive on, why the promise of prosperity their parents enjoyed has evaporated. You have a choice to make, but you need to make it with clarity about what you're choosing. Are you choosing to deploy your human capital where it's valued, or are you choosing to pay the loyalty tax indefinitely? Are you building a future in a jurisdiction that rewards productivity, or are you subsidizing a system that's in managed decline? These are not comfortable questions, but comfort is a luxury that fewer Canadians can afford with each passing year. The competence void is real, the exodus is accelerating, and the mathematics are undeniable. What you do with that information is up to you, but the one thing you cannot do is pretend you weren't warned. Friends, thank you for being here today. The decisions ahead are not easy, but they are necessary. And whatever you choose, choose with your eyes open to the structural reality we've discussed. Because the system is counting on you not to notice, not to calculate, not to act. Don't give them that satisfaction.